Welcome back to A Bit of Curiosity. As usual, I'm your host, Jeremy Howlett. Today I'm joined by Chris Jones, and I've known Chris for almost 13, 14 years now. And we'll kind of get into how we met, when we worked together, etc. But Chris is a high-energy entrepreneur who thrives on navigating growth. Not only has he successfully grown his own businesses, he's helped others do the same. For Chris, it's all about being better every day, and he is relentlessly passionate about helping entrepreneurs build better businesses and ultimately a better life. When Chris isn't crushing goals and heading toward the end zone in business, you'll find him spending time with his family. They enjoy hiking, biking, and walking. He also likes to cycle, run Masters track, for which he still holds a Canadian record set in 2010. Good for you. Ski, golf, hike, and he likes to catch a Stampeders or Flames game whenever he can. Jess, we met when we hired you guys, Entrix Sports, to distribute Ultra into Canada. And that was a ways into your entrepreneur journey. But as in your bio, right, like you are about helping entrepreneurs build better businesses. You helped us build our business better. Not only like you were one of our first distributors, right? So we had a lot of kinks that we had to figure out, right? Like, so we definitely have a lot of experience, but talk to us a little bit. Why did you decide to become an entrepreneur?
Man, I don't know if I had a choice. I started my first company in university, and I was in science and education and school playing football. And my girlfriend's father at the time said, "Hey, you guys should run a business while you're going to school. Run it in the part-time, and you should run a pop machine business," he said. And my girlfriend at the time, she rolled her eyes. "Oh, dad," right? She'd heard this a few times before, I got the impression. Anyways, I came back to him a week later and said, "I'm out." And he's like, "Pardon?" I'm like, "Yeah, like I looked at the opportunity. I don't think it's good." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know. Like I went and looked at the pop machine business a bit. And I looked at, the equipment first, right? Like to buy a new machine is this amount of money. It's pretty expensive. I don't have any cash. So I was a poor university student, so I got to finance it, and it's just kind of payments, or I could buy used equipment, or I could lease. Used stuff is going to have a lot of maintenance. That's pretty risky. And then you look at the locations. All the good locations are spoken for. So now I'm in second-rate locations, like grinding for a couple cents on the dollar by the time I buy the product. And I said, "So I don't think it's a good opportunity. I'm out." And he's sitting there listening, going, "What the hell was that?" Right? Like, "What are you doing in science and education?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know. Like, I'm good at science. I like to teach." And he's like, "Well, do you like science?" I'm like, "No, I'm hating it." Right? And he says, "Well, if you like to teach, like, you can coach a baseball team or can teach in business. But you have like intuition around business that I don't see from people old, like 40 years old, like in their 40s, they don't understand what you intuitively get."
Yeah.
I thought that was old at the time. Not so much anymore.
Not anymore.
And he's just like, "Well, have you ever thought of taking business in school?" And I'm like, "Well, no, I never considered it, but I've known since I was a little kid that I wanted to be an entrepreneur because I just wanted to create products and solve problems." And I knew that was in me. And as soon as he said it, I'm just like, I never thought of taking that in university. My parents were entrepreneurs, and I think it was just who I was. And so I changed my focus in school that summer and moved all my courses into the Bachelor of Commerce direction. And within a year, I'd started my first company and built that sporting goods business, and then invented a football glove, and, then went the distribution route. And yeah, I met you in 2012, and off we go. Actually, it was 2011 when I first met you guys. Yeah, I think the very first show in Austin.
That was 2010. Yeah.
Was that
before
2010
we,
even?
Before we
Right.
even launched. We got introduced by Mike Potter there at CEP.
Hey.
And so that was our first introduction to you guys, and your first introduction to this new, what the heck are these guys doing, launching this zero drop foot share brand, right? Like,
I still have that first pair because they're too durable, as you know.
yeah, oh yeah.
And they're a good shoe. They're a phenomenal shoe. I still wear Ultra every day.
Absolutely. Likewise. So I
Yeah.
love that. I love that journey. Like that's like there's not a lot of kids that I could go pull off of a college campus that have never taken business classes that could give me the due diligence of like, this is why the numbers don't make sense, right? Like of putting in a pop machine, right? Like
Yeah.
that's impressive. Like I think, yeah, even a lot of entrepreneurs just don't always know those numbers clear, right? Like, and
Yeah.
until we really get in and start digging and learn it. So, yeah, there was an intuition there. That's awesome, Chris. Like, yeah, what a great story. And so you developed the football glove. So talk to me. So Entrix Sports was a distribution company. You were distributing
Yeah.
different companies, CEP, Earbuds, Ultra, and you were leading the industry up in Canada with a lot of these brands and doing some great things. But why go that route when you had already developed a product versus, because you talk about as an entrepreneur, you want to develop products that solve problems. So
Yeah.
why shift from product to then being a service distributor business?
Yeah. So I invented the glove in 96. That was my second product. The first product was like a hand warmer. That was 95. And I spent about 3 years trying to solve the manufacturing problem. I knew the problem that needed to be solved and spent a lot of time, effort, and some money, what little I could scrape together. But we were getting pretty good success. Like we had NFL and CFL receivers wearing our stuff. But it was really crude, right? But it worked. So I think we all know that story of having a crude product that works. Like that's where we started too, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And it wasn't a long-term solution. And so I was trying to source a manufacturer and was like, I went to my one mentor. He just passed just over a year ago, but he was a big dog in the world of business in Canada. Former commissioner of the CFL. The guy's name was Doug Mitchell, one of the most helpful guys ever. And he knew, like, he's like, okay, Chris, he signed up as a mentor for me and helped me on my board of advisors. He's like, hey, I got this problem, right? I need to develop my own plastic for grip for the gloves. And he's like, okay, great. Let's get the CEO of Nova Chemicals involved. This is like a multi-billion-dollar operation. And the CEO gets involved and says, okay, well, he needs to talk to this guy, right? So he connects me to the guy at Nova Chemicals I need to chat with. I'm like, okay, here's the problem I need to solve. And I'm like, if I could raise $1 million in finance, I think I can get $1 million in financing. Not sure how I was going to do it, but I'm pretty sure I could do it. So I can raise $1 million in financing. Would you build this plastic for me? And he goes, well, how many barrels a year would you need? Like, I don't know, whatever, 120 liter barrels. And I'm like, well, if we could get all football gloves in the world, yeah, we'd probably need about like 10 barrels a year. And he's like, yeah, we need like 10,000 a month. Otherwise, even with $1 million, no go, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. And so I was kind of like 3 years of running into not walls, but like thick brick walls that were 200 feet high.
Yeah.
Going, this ain't happening. And yeah, I didn't have any money to like, even if I could have found $1 million. He's like, yeah, it's a 3-year process to develop a plastic. There needs to be big upside on the other end. So anyways, I kind of putzed along doing my own thing. I found another solution that I was in the process of getting developed. That's a fun story. But anyways, I got pretty creative, like as entrepreneurs do, of like taking existing products and finding and getting right to the source of the material. And so I was at this point where I had a company in China making prototypes for me of something that was going to work pretty good. And then this guy calls me out of the blue and says, I've solved the problem. I'm like, what are you talking about? He says, yeah, like I heard about you and what you're doing, and I'm doing the same thing. Let's talk, right? And he says, I've solved the plastic problem. I'm like, well, what do you mean? And he says, well, took 3 years, but a company bought into my vision of where I was going with this thing to change the glove industry. and we've got the plastic. And I'm like, will you sign a non-compete? And I'm like, no. Like, I have a thing, like, I'm right around the corner. But if it took you 3 years, like, do you really have anything to worry about? Like, non-disclosure, non-compete? Like,
Yeah, for real.
I'm pretty sure you're good. He says, here's what I committed to him. Let me see the stuff, and I'll give you an answer within 24 hours. And if it's good, you've got my word, I'm in. And he says, okay. So he took a leap of faith and sent me the stuff, and it was exactly what the market needed. And I'm like, oh, okay, we're going to dominate the market with this. And he says, yeah, would you become the exclusive Canadian distributor? That means that means you have to stop manufacturing your own stuff. And I'm like, okay, let's go. Because I knew, like, we were instantly everywhere with this product. I would dominate the market with this. So I signed on, and that was the beginning of the distribution instead of manufacturing.
So there's 3 things I want to pull out of there, right? First is, so your mentor, right? How did you get acquainted with your mentor? Like, where did that come from?
So my university professors were on my first board of advisors. So I just went to the profs that I resonated the most with and, hey, this is this thing I got going on. And so one of them was this lady in the law side of business. And she's like, well, you need to talk to Doug Mitchell. Like, he's the guy. Like, he was the commissioner of the CFL, and he's tied into everybody. He knows everybody. And I articled at his firm. At the time, it was called Howard Mackey. And I'm like, great. So I pick up the phone. I call Howard Mackey. I'm like, yeah, I need to talk to Doug Mitchell. And they're like, oh, okay. And so they connect me through, and Doug picks up the phone. Like, he's the head dog at
No
this big law
gatekeeper.
firm.
They just put you right through.
Yeah,
That's
they're
awesome.
just like, oh, okay, you want to talk to Doug? Okay. Well, and I think I gave him a story like Sandra, Malik told me to give you a call. So I get on the phone. I'm like, yeah, so Sandra Malik told me to give you a call, said, you're the guy I need to talk to. And he's like, who? Well, Sandra Malik, like, she worked there. She said she knew you. And he's like, oh, that's okay. I don't know her, but that's okay. Anyway, so why did you call? And so it was totally cold call. And I go back to Sandra and say, yeah, so like, Doug didn't seem to know who you were. And she's like, well, of course, I just articled there in this massive firm. Like, he didn't know me from it. But I can't believe I had to talk to him. So I was just totally ignorant that I got the opportunity to talk with him, and just the courageousness of like, hey, I just, like, I'm supposed to call you. And therefore, they got me through.
Yeah, I love that idea, right? Like, because I think a lot of times, right, like, if we get a referral, like, if it's not a warm introduction, it's kind of like, yeah, that person's not going to want to talk to me, right? Like, they're not going to give me the time to do. But you took the courage to make the call, and then you worked your way in and got an acquaintance with him. And not only did he become acquaintance, but he unlocked a lot of doors for you along your future and became a major mentor. Like, what a powerful thing that is, to just that persistence, right? Like, or really, like, it was just courage, right? Like, okay, I'm just going to make the call. Like, I'm not afraid to just make that call. So,
yeah, it was a key thing. Also, like, that's who Doug was. Doug was a guy that would just pick up the phone. And I walked in the first time I met him, and I'm like, what's this QC thing on your door, Doug? Before your name or after your name? He says, that basically means I'm old. And he says, I'm like, well, haha, right? And he's like, yeah, well, really what it means is Queen's Counsel, which is like, they give it to lawyers once you've done a certain number of things. But if I had my way, I lost this battle, but I'd prefer that none of my lawyers had any letters behind their names on their doors. And he said, because we're all just people working on the same team. And so Doug was one of the most humble servant leaders I'd ever met. And I hadn't spent a lot of time around people like that. It's just, my dad was a teacher and my mom stayed at home. And, we had a wonderful group of friends growing up, but I'd never been around like big business leaders. And here was this guy that people could like worship because they thought he was so amazing, but he was just a regular dude saying, drop the facade. And he significantly influenced the way I operate as a leader now, because he showed me the right way to do it, in my opinion, right? Like, I modeled a lot of what I do after how he operated.
There's a lot of power in leading in that way, right? Like, I think sometimes we look at people that are wealthy or prestigious or whatever and see them as completely different individuals when in reality we're all just humans having a human experience. Some have accomplished a few more things than others, and those that realize that can be a benefit to a lot of people, right? Just like Doug was for you, right? And I think like, and so the second point from your earlier, right, like is a lot of times in business and in starting our own thing, we set out to do it one way, and there's a lot of shifts that happen, and a lot of times it's somebody else coming in and saying, "Hey, let's do it this way," or "Here, I've solved this problem," right? Like in your example, right? Like your story, you've got a guy who's solved the plastic problem that you were fighting to solve, and he comes to you and says, "Hey, I've got it solved. Like, let's go." And that shifts that completely shifts your trajectory, right? Which then takes me to the third point of like, as an entrepreneur, so much of it is being nimble, and it's being able to kind of shift with the tides a little bit, right? Like understanding where the market's at, understanding what's happening in our world to then make that shift. And so for you, it sounds like it was kind of a no-brainer to say, you know what? I don't need to make my own gloves anymore because I've got the product that I wanted. I wasn't able to crack the code, but this guy was, but I have the whole Canadian market open to me to go sell it.
Yeah. Later, as I realized purpose and understood purpose better, which took me quite a while to nail what the heck that even meant in a business. I couldn't wrap my head around that concept in university so well. But later I realized that our purpose as an organization was to create positive change for athletes. And so I didn't care whether it was me creating that change or someone else, but I knew the athletes wanted this product and we could change for them with a product like this. How it happened was less important to me.
And what a great lesson, right? Like I think in life, we sometimes hold on to things because it's, oh, this is my brainchild, this is my baby. But is it the product? Is it the idea that we're holding on to? Or are we holding on to the purpose, right? Like where in your world here, it was about the purpose. I was listening to a podcast by Simon Sinek recently, who wrote the book on why, right? Like start with why. And he kind of he's like, I kept talking to business owners and entrepreneurs and I kept asking them like, what's your mission? And they'd give me a mission statement or whatever. And then I'd ask, what's your vision? And a lot of times it was the same, or some would call it mission, some would call it vision. And he's like, you know what? I wasn't gonna write a book starts with vision or starts with mission or starts with purpose. That's why I wrote the book starts with why.
Yeah.
Because like semantically, we couldn't figure out a firm definition on those, right? But we can all understand our why. And so where you had that why shaped the rest of your decisions in the way that you ran your business.
Yeah.
It's why you took us on, right? Like it's
100%.
It's why you took on CEP. It's why you took on a lot like these other brands, right? Like getting into the distribution world, but yet you were looking at this purpose, this why, and that's what formed and shaped every other decision.
It did. And what we were best at was sporting goods distribution in Canada. And the why was to create the positive change. So we find a product like that. I used your product, the demo stuff that you gave me, and I'm like, I love this product. And so the right athletes are going to love this product. And yeah, we can be the expert to bring that product to Canada. And those two things created a filtering mechanism for us, if you will.
Yeah. So how does that trickle over into what you're doing now? Having kind of discovered now that, okay, what we were actually doing was hinging on our purpose.
Yeah.
How does that translate to like, you've kind of written a book that goes into some of that, and what you're doing now with your coaching and other practice really hinges on a lot of that stuff. So how does that translate?
So I had a Bachelor of Commerce, and so we learned a lot of fancy stuff there. And we talked about vision and mission, which quite frankly, nobody there explained it well enough that I understood it either. So much to the same of Simon's response was like, I don't think anyone there knew the difference either. And so I'd been running a business for, 95 through probably 2011, 2010. And then I read a book called Traction by Gino Wickman. And I'm like, oh, this stuff's really good. And he pulled in all these lessons from all these different authors that I loved and said, okay, here's how you make this happen and bring it to life. And so we clarified for the first time ever. Well, we'd had some other stuff, vision, mission, which was just such BS. It was just MBA, Rolodex. We're solving every problem in the world for everybody. But that one piece, the vision of creating positive change for athletes through innovation started to hold. And then as we implemented EOS, which is in the book Traction, then it got crystal clear. And then Frankie, as you know, Frankie and I are sitting here as we're building this out. And I'm like, okay, so we got this vision statement, creating positive change for athletes through innovation, or the other two words on there. And I asked him, I'm like, do you actually think this is any good? And I realized in that moment, I'd never asked anybody on my team. And I'm like, oh, that was a miss. Anyways, and his response was awesome. He says, I use this almost every day. I think it is exactly what we're all about. We totally hit it out of the park. Like, this captures us at its essence, 100%. I'm like, oh, that feels good. Now, we looked at the mission statement and both of us are like, this is complete garbage. Right? It was like to have the best people, processes, platforms, and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, it was just the MBA Rolodex garbage. And we're like, okay, that's out. Both of us looked at it. But the first one was good. So that tool helped me, the book, and then what brought me to where I am today. As we implemented those tools into Entrix Sports, when we signed on with you, we had lost 70% of our business in one conversation in San Antonio in 2012, January. So I'm actually going back to San Antonio for the first time since in February, and I can't wait to go back. That was a tough time as, the business just vaporized.
Yeah.
The only thing we had left was CP that was any good. So we almost shut it down. We're like, well, do we rebuild it? And we're like, I think we can rebuild it. And Ultra was one of the companies that we built it around. CP, Ultra, earbuds. And then we had Bonet as well, which is a portable net company in the team sports world. And those four companies we rebuilt around, and we implemented the tools within EOS into our business and grew it so fast that within a year, we beat our previous year's sales. We recovered in less than 12 months. And within 2.5, 3 years, we were 2.5 times bigger than ever before. And we're just that was so what seemed like a disaster of losing 70% ended up being the best gift ever. And we used the tools to regrow it. And then we regrew it. And then I woke up one day and I'm like, I'm done. I had 19 years in the business. And I'm like, I've done what I came here to do. I'm comfortable, probably too comfortable. And it's time to go do something else. Yeah, this real moment of clarity. And I just knew it was time to move on.
So, no, I think we all seek for those moments of clarity, right? We all want those. Sometimes they come in a whim. Sometimes they take a lot of work to get to.
Yeah.
I think, so as you talk about, right, a couple of attributors to your success with Entrix, right, and turning it around. Because it's what a blow, right? Losing 70% of your business in one swoop, right? One fell swoop. Yeah. But to be able to regain that back within the next 12 months is massive, and then to just scale it there. And so I want to say it's all Ultra, right? That's the reason. But obviously,
of course,
obviously, you made some executive changes within the business. So talk to us about kind of how those came to play, what those were. For those that aren't familiar with EOS, maybe kind of lay out a little bit of a framework.
Sure.
But how did that shift in your life as a leader, and what were those changes, and how did you execute them?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, as we're implementing the tools, as we're regrowing the business, what we had to do was make really hard decisions about what we were going to do and not going to do, because there was not a lot of margin for error. We had to lay off a bunch of people. We knew the game plan. I had a written plan B because of another mentor. So we pulled that out, put the plan B into action, and started to regrow the business. And as we were doing so, there was like tentacles pulling me back down into the day-to-day in certain elements. And Frankie's like, well, can you help us with this? I'm like, I can't. Right? We got to solve that another way. I have to find new suppliers and close new deals and help us launch the new companies. That's it. I'm out. We got to get someone else, whether it's you or someone else, has got to do everything else. Because if I don't do that, we don't have a company. And so I started getting really maniacal about like, can't do that. Nope, not doing that. And so I started saying no to doing a lot of things. And before I'd be like, well, I guess I could do that. I know how to do that. Okay, sure. And all of a sudden I'm doing all these activities that aren't game changing. I was solving $5,000 problems instead of $500,000 problems. And when I didn't have the option, if I don't solve the $500,000 problems, we don't have a company. And so I'm like, someone else got to solve the $500,000 and $5,000 problems, figure it out. And Frankie was amazing at doing that. So whether he did it or found someone else to do it, I just focused on the $500,000 problems and it worked, right? And I kept landing deal after deal and finding the right company. I got a little bit lucky. We picked some good brands to associate. Obviously, Ultra was one of those. And then I went to my kids who were 6 and 9 at the time. And I'm like, okay, look, like something big happened in my business and I need to be on the road a bunch this year, which isn't my normal way. But the next year, I got to go all out to get on the road to launch these brands. And after 12 months, I commit to you, I'll back off. And the kids are like, okay, Dad, sure, like 6 and 9, right? But what I was guarding against is I knew other entrepreneurs, when they went away for a bunch, their kids punished them. And I'm like, how do I embrace them and make them part of the solution? And so they were phenomenal. My wife helped with that, and the kids were phenomenal as I regrew the company. And so I think that answers a bunch of it. And at the end of 12 months, I said, okay, now I'm backing off of travel. We got back to where we needed to be now. But I learned the lesson of stop saying yes to all the $5,000 problem solves. And that was a pivotal moment for me as a leader of just, the who, not how that Dan Sullivan talks about.
Yeah. No, I talk about it a bit I've talked about it a bit on this podcast before, but I read The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. And that's essentially what you were doing, right? Like you were saying, okay, if our business is really going to succeed, then I need to focus on the $500,000 problems and I need to say no to everything else. And I think, especially for business owners, but all of us in our individual lives, it's easy to get caught up with the minutia, right? Like there's so many mundane things, right? Like Covey would call it like getting lost in the small things or the little thing, right? Like, and so we need to put the big things first, right? Like, and we tend to get afraid to say no, right? Like,
Yeah.
It's good to please people to some degree, right? Like, but if we're just always there to please people or solve everybody else's problems, A, they're never going to learn how to solve them themselves, or B, we're never going to grow. And like I've taken on some real good theories of email recently. Well, really over the last decade. But email can become a controller of our lives. We can get stuck in email a lot. And it's really getting caught up in everybody else's problems, because there's almost never an email that comes to you that is going to solve your problem. It's just going to cause you to go have to fix somebody else's problem. And and so one of the things that I've found is like, if you leave the email unresponded, most often it's going to get solved before you ever get back to it. because they'll figure out another way to solve it, or it just doesn't, it's not important, right? And I think that's the same thing, like as we look at our lives or our businesses, right? Like the $500 problems or the $5,000 problems. Yeah, okay, maybe they need to be solved, maybe they're a fire, but who can we delegate that to that can actually own that and be responsible for it? While those of us that are sitting in a position where it's like, if I spend all day on $5,000 problems, I'm not going to be able to make payroll.
Exactly.
Because that's where I'm like, $5,000 problems might bring the company in $5,000 extra a month, but that's not going to make payroll 3 months down the road.
It's, yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, well, I've built out a talk on, it was like one wedge of my book on how to let go and still sleep at night. And I've built an entire talk and workshop on that concept. And like, there's the logical side of this equation. Like, I need to delegate my email to a good assistant, right? Hey, this is really logical stuff. I need to solve the $500,000 problems, not the $5,000 problems. Great. Like, this stuff's all super logical. But yet entrepreneurs and leaders that I work with continue to not do that. And I'm like, okay, so what's going on? Like, the logic is this. And they're like, yeah. And I've like seen it happen of like, there's this invisible barrier to break through that is not logical with many leaders. And I'll share with you one example where this came up. So we do this exercise in our annual planning where everyone goes around the room and gives each other real feedback of one thing they should start or stop doing for the benefit of the company, the benefit of the team. In addition to, hey, what do I most admire about you, right? So I'm going to give you a prop and then I'm going to give you a challenge of what you can do better. And so this one leader goes and says, well, the founder says to the finance leader, hey, what I'd really love you to do is start speaking up more and making more decisions. And everyone gives their feedback, and the finance leader says, I'm going to speak up more and make more decisions. They make a commitment at the end of the feedback. And so everyone's like, yeah, that's great. Okay, everyone, this is what we're going to focus on. We're going to commit to doing this better in the next 12 months. So the next day we're problem solving together. And I watched this finance leader like bolster themselves up, like, not that exaggerated, but it wasn't far off.
Yeah.
And like, okay. And just kind of blurts out, I think we should do this. This is what we're going to do. And the founding owner looks at them and says, that's never going to effing work. We're not doing that. And then look the other. And that person just went from like shock to like dismay to disgust to disconnect and like, screw it, I'm out. Right? Like they were checked out. And the founder had no idea it happened. So here's the logic side of the brain saying you need to speak up and make more decisions, which they needed that out of that leader. But there was some emotional animal going, screw that, that's a bad idea. Now the logic, the emotion just overran the logic side of the brain. Maybe in hindsight, he should have said, tell me why you think that might be a good idea. Like,
no, absolutely, maybe right? Like
it was a bad idea, but there's something in the way, right?
Yeah, well, and that financier is not going to talk up for the next 12 months. Like,
yeah, completely disconnected.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. He took his shot, right? Like, he took his shot. He said, okay, like, you told me to do this. So here I go. I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
And, like, that's like you take basketball, for example, right? Like, we throw the team out on the court. The coach goes to the player. He says, you know what? When you get the ball, I want you to take the shot. I want you to take it. And so the ball swings around, hits the guy in the corner. He takes the shot. Whether it goes in or not, who cares? Coach calls timeout and pulls him out and puts him on the bench. That's exactly what happened in that scenario, right?
Totally.
Like, I want you to take the shot. Well, you took the shot, but now you're on the bench, right? Like, nope, no more. That player's not going to take the shot next time he gets in the game. He could be wide open. He could have an easy layup. He's not going to take it because the coach pulled him last time he took a shot. Like, it ain't happening. And I've seen that. Like, I've seen it so much in business, and it is poor leadership, right? Like, going back to Doug, right? Like, I think you talk about how a lot of the way that you lead, you learned from Doug. Yeah. What were some of the principles, like you talk about how he's a servant leader. What were some of these principles that you saw in him that were like, you know what, that's why I want to lead, and that's how you did it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, well, yeah, I had to learn how to lead like me and not like Doug, but that's a whole other conversation. But some of the things that I took from him that are authentically who I am is that the conversation's bigger than me. Like, I don't need to be right in any conversation, but I want the real stuff shared. And I have no commitment to being right. And so I think that in that, I want the best decision to be made, whether it's from me or you. And I tell my team that. And that's not common practice with a lot of, especially entrepreneurial businesses. I can't speak a lot for the corporate world, but I'm sure that happens there too. But the entrepreneurial business, especially if the founder's in the room, everybody just automatically defers to the founder. Like, well, then make the call. I'm like, no, that's not how it works here. If you're accountable for marketing, Jeremy, on my team, and we're going to talk about marketing ideas, and they look at me for the decision, I'm like, Jeremy, you're accountable for marketing. You make the call. Right? Like, how can I and that's not common is what I've learned. But when you
It's
have
not
clear
common. Like
accountability, yeah,
I think I learned a lot in my career to
yeah,
to let those that work with me and for me make the decisions and be accountable because I didn't get that luxury necessarily. Right? As a founder, I certainly had a lot of free reign to do that. But as soon as we were acquired, our parent company was very intimidating. They were very authoritative, and it was exactly what you're talking about with this other CEO, right? Like you spoke up and you spoke your mind, and you were going to get challenged every time. And that's just not a healthy culture, right? Like, and I get that, yeah, okay, we've got to justify our reasoning or whatever, but being challenged in a it's like being on a football field when the coach is challenging every move you make. Like, you're not going to make a lot of moves. You're going to be skittish every play. And that's like, that company culture is not healthy. And it's amazing to me. So talk to him about this. Like, so I'm renovating a house as an investment property, and I've got a lot of subcontractors working for me, and a lot of times I'll ask them, I'm like, what do you think? Like, what do you think we should do? What color do you think we should paint the walls? I don't know. I want you to make the call. Like, I don't want to be in trouble for using the wrong color. Like, that's not, no, you're the painter. Like, you tell me what color we should do the walls. Like, and I want them to make the call, right? But so many people are afraid to make the call. And I think a lot of it goes to your financier example, right? Because in the past, they may have been just completely shut down by the call. But how do we teach people to be able to step up within their roles, to have that ownership and be brave enough to say, okay, like, I'll make this call. Like, I'm willing to have the skin in the game.
Yeah, I think I think one of the most powerful things I do as an implementer with EOS is help companies clarify structure. And we call it an accountability chart. It's sort of like an org chart on steroids. But when you clarify structure and clarify accountability, i.e., you're in charge of marketing. Well, how can I hold you accountable for success or failure in marketing if you're not making those decisions?
Right.
And so now, should you socialize those decisions and get input from the appropriate people? If you're making all your decisions in a vacuum, are you going to make the best decision? Probably not. Right. But if you're accountable for delivering on marketing to a high degree, are we clear on the expectations? Okay. Kind of like a high performance military squadron. They don't tell you how to achieve an objective. They tell you the objective that needs to be achieved. Right? They're not going to tell you whether you should, go up the flank, right? And so it's similar, I think, in figuring out structure for an organization. But when people are clear on what they own, the autonomy of that, therefore the accountability, and are they excited to get phenomenal at that, and they're aligned with the why behind the business, I think magic starts happening. And it's hard. It's hard always, but you start finding people that are willing to step up and be accountable for that and want the ownership. And some people don't. It's like, I'm not sure you're a leader then. That's okay. Right. But the leaders want to step up and solve those problems. And that's when the conversation starts to shift. And it's kind of crazy. It's almost like you physically watch the weight shift in the room. because it was all on the founding owner before.
Yeah.
And it's just heavy, right? Like every decision, everything has got to run through them. But then when you start getting phenomenal people with clarity of roles, all of a sudden they start carrying the load. And the trust transition starts to happen. Hey, I trust you in marketing. You're awesome at what you do. What do you think we should do? And, you're awesome at what you do. So then you've got a great idea. I'm like, you got my support. Let's go. And that starts to happen. And that's a pretty magical moment in a team when the founding owner starts to truly trust the other people on the team.
Well, and it becomes a cultural shift too across the entire company, right?
It starts with the leadership team and then it pervades out 100%.
Well, and
Yeah.
like the example you cited earlier between the founder owner and the financier, everybody that was in that room that saw that happen, like whether they recognize it or not, they just became disengaged.
They did, except I called it out.
Yeah, well, right. But if you weren't there to call it out, right? Like if you weren't there to point that out and say, you know what, this is exactly what, like, this is exactly why he doesn't do what you've asked him to do, right? Like if you're not there to call it out, culturally, it just pervades, right? Like nobody's going to speak up, right? Like I've seen it in a number of organizations, right? You'll have a leader, an instructor, whatever. Like if you're in a classroom setting and a teacher says, hey, somebody's got a great comment and they cut them off and they're like, you know what? We don't have time for that. We got to get through the rest of the material. Guess what everybody else just did? They all just disengaged.
Right.
Because I'm not going to make a comment. You just cut him off. I'm not speaking up. And it's the same way in business. Like as soon as somebody gets reprimanded for a little thing, and especially if it's something that they just were told you should do this.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to, they check out, they disengage. And then you're like, now everything's back on you as the leader to do it all yourself.
Yeah. We become the root cause of our own problem if we're not able to take that breath in the moment when the energy, that emotion gets high. And so luckily we talked about it with that team and we had a really productive conversation of like how hard it is and whether it's a founding owner, but it happens at all levels in the organization, of how do we let go in those moments? How do we create a conversation of like, well, why are you thinking that? Because it might have been a bad idea. That's not the point. The point is you ask them to speak up. Now you got to listen. And they are, right? So, yeah, otherwise it can become a subtle cultural thing that if you don't manage it, it becomes a really big problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us about a moment, Chris, when you failed at something and how did you respond to that?
Failed at something.
Or it was a failure in your business you were running, or a moment of failure, and how did you respond?
Yeah. Okay, so here's a fun one. You might even know the person. So when I was early on and I'm hiring sales managers, I'm growing the distribution business and it couldn't be me doing that work anymore. And so I'd had 2 people in the role previous. And we sold to stores, right? For people to understand what a distributor is, like we had 600 stores across Canada we sold to. And the store owners or the buyer at the store, we'd communicate with them, etc. And so the sales manager that I had on my team would like talk to the store owner, the buyer. And if they didn't like what they got from my sales manager, every now and then I'd get a call. And the owner would be like, hey, Chris, like this is what they're doing. This is what's going on. And when I was naive, I would sometimes override my sales manager. Okay, all right. Well, then I'll let it go. Like, yeah, we can work this out and this is how it can work. Yeah, not recognizing the damage that was creating. And so then I hired Frankie. And so I did something like that. And he looks at me one day, he says, so if you're just going to do my job, why'd you hire me?
Good for Frankie. Good for Frankie.
And I kind of looked at him and I'm like, oh my God, you're like dead right. He had me dead to rights. And I'm like, huh. Because he was really good at what he did. His instincts were phenomenal. Even when he was learning, he had really good instincts in that role. And of course, his life history had helped him be good at it as well. And I'm like, well, yeah, I trust you to do your job. Like, why am I doing this? And so I had to learn, like, well, how do I let go of this? So when they would call me and try that end around, which is for sure what it was,
Yeah.
I didn't like the answer I got from mom, so I'm going to dad, right? Like, oh, yeah, Frankie was mom, I guess. So anyway, but I just started playing dumb. I'm like, actually, I don't even know the details of this situation. And you know what? That's Frankie's gig now. Like, what are you not getting from Frankie that you need? And they didn't really have much other than, well, I didn't like the answer he gave me. I'm like, okay, well, I got Frankie's back. So help me understand, is there something better we do? But I'm going to bounce it back to Frankie. He's going to make the final call no matter what. And they stopped calling me. But yeah, the mistake for sure of taking the bait of solving the problem when it really wasn't my call to make.
Yeah. No, it's a great lesson in business and in parenting, right? Like as parents, we need to get aligned, right? Like if mom said that's the case, then that's the case, right? Like,
I got her back, right?
yep.
Yeah.
What would you consider as your greatest accomplishment, Chris?
If you'd asked me probably 4 months ago, I'd say probably that recovery of that crisis in 2012 was probably the top moment. A lot of lessons, the Relentless AF book is about that, and leadership lessons around that gift of crisis. But honestly, the last 3 months, I've started to, like, a really big new page has opened up for me, and I've started 2 other businesses, one of them with my 17-year-old son in the last 3 months. And I think, and the learning and the win that's come from all of that is really understanding what my unique ability is. The relentless and fun mindset shifter who empowers growth or greatness is really what I've come to learn is, like, I just get so much energy when I'm living in that space. And over time, it's been this kind of process of shedding things and jobs and tasks and ego attached to, like, being good at these things that I really don't need to be. And I think these 2 new businesses are starting with me not doing any, like, next to none of the execution, but I'm coaching, advising these people to start and help. And I'm an investor, and they're starting these businesses, and I'm just empowering with the tools so they can do this on their own. Yeah. I don't know. Like, I was presented this opportunity for a chatbot company.
Okay.
Implementation business. And I'm like, well, I don't have time to do it. And quite frankly, it doesn't fit within my unique ability. So no. But then I went home and I look at my 17-year-old son. I'm like, hey, Trey, do you think you'd want to do this? Like, I'd help you and show you how to do it. Get your own business started. And he asked me a few questions about it. And he says, oh yeah, I'd love to do that. And I'm saying, well, I probably want to implement EOS in this. It'll be a better business and easier to run. He says, I can see the impact you're having on the companies and the leaders you work with. There's clearly something there. I'd love to experience that with you. And I'm going, yeah, okay. That's, kind of went weak in the knees, right?
For sure. What's it like starting a business with your son? Like, that's fantastic, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's finding something that we're mutually passionate about with our children is every parent's dream, right? So what is that like?
It's super fun. I said I kind of went full visionary on him the one day of, like, all these ideas, and I, like, woke up at 2 a.m. Like big goal could be helping 10,000 companies implement chatbots. And, like, screw that. How about we help 1,000 students or young adults start chatbot companies? And that will help the 10,000 companies. And I'm like, that's what I'm doing with you. And he's like, I love that, right? But at the end of the session, he goes, Dad, Mom always told me that you thought differently than other people. And I'd never fully experienced it until today. Because I was just full on idea, not all good. And that's okay. Like, let's just choose something. I don't have to be right, but I just let it rip. And we just laughed ourselves silly at that, right? I'm like, yeah, this is how I operate. His ability to see it and call it out, we just both are having a ton of fun. And it drives me crazy when he's like, well, I got a test to study for. And I'm like, I got 2 warm leads that just hit the funnel. I'm like, well, what are you going to call them, right? Like, he's like, well, I got to study for tomorrow's test. And I'm like, biting my tongue going, it's not moving fast enough for me, but this is his business and I can't do it. So I got to just
It's about a balance of being the driver, entrepreneur, and teaching your kid how to do it while he's still in high school.
And so I accept that, and we've laughed about it. I'm like, that's really hard for me not to say anything right now. And he's like, yeah, I can tell.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. What a fun project. What a fun way to engage with your boy. Like, what a great experience. And before we
Yeah,
wrap here, Chris, I want to throw just a few rapid fire questions at you, and then we'll
go
we'll
for it.
conclude. So, what inspires you?
People making courageous changes.
Love it. What is something that you would want to tell your 18-year-old self?
Stop trying to be good at everything.
I think it's in the way of us. Like, perfectionism gets in the way of us achieving so much sometimes.
Well, just try and do fewer things better, right? Like
Yeah.
the essentialism, Greg McKeown, and like just release, like embrace the stuff you suck at and just like, I'm terrible at this. Someone else, please do that. Yeah. Instead of I was trying to be good at everything way too much when I was young.
What book are you reading right now?
Grapes of Wrath.
Okay.
And Steve Jobs biography by Isaacson.
Yeah. That's a good one. Have you read it before? Is this a repeat or is
No,
this
I
the
never
first
read
time
it
through?
before.
Okay.
I read his book on Musk, and I'm like,
Okay.
hey, this guy gets the real stuff out. Like, I want to hear the other ones.
Yeah, so if this is your first foray into Walter Isaacson, you're in for a treat, right? Like, because
He's
I haven't read
phenomenal.
Elon Musk. I haven't read that one yet, but I've read Jobs, I've read Benjamin Franklin, I've read Da Vinci.
Einstein, I heard he did.
I've read Einstein's and then I think another one. But yeah, it's phenomenal. I love Walter Isaacson. I love the story of Steve Jobs. I think like there's so much that we can learn about vision and just simplification, right? Like he was crazy in certain regards, right? But
Yeah.
but the way that he saw things was definitely different and made some serious adjustments because of it. And just the ability to start a company, get kicked out of the company, go start another company, and then get brought back into your original company. Like it's phenomenal to see just how he became who he became, right? So
Yeah.
what book have you read in the past 12 to 18 months that you would highly recommend to others?
Drive by Daniel Pink.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, it's an older one, but phenomenal.
Great leadership motivation book, right? Like teaching us as leaders how to motivate our teams and how to inspire greatness out of others for sure.
Well,
So,
and we so often go at it wrong, right? Like
yeah.
because we were taught from kids of the if-then rewards. That was school. Do this so you can get a mark. Instead of like go explore to be excellent, and you have accountability for this. And here's the why. And yeah, we go to more money. Like, oh, we'll pay them more to fix it. It's like, no, very few circumstances will that change the behavior long term.
Yeah. Two other books kind of in that vein that I'd highly recommend would be Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last.
Yep.
And then also The Infinite Game.
Yeah.
Because they both play on that really well as well. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love it.
For sure. What's your favorite place you've traveled in the past and why?
Well, probably recency by the year, probably South Africa. I think just such a dramatic cultural difference, beautiful place in the world. Everything is dangerous there, especially on safari. Like the trees will kill you out there. Yeah, I got on this. We went for a walk at lunchtime in the Jeep. They don't even have guns in the Jeep, but we went for a walk at lunchtime outside the fenced area in single file, 2 loaded hunting rifles. This is dangerous. And I looked and I'm like, how would you go for a run if you live down here? We just take for granted we can just go for a run anywhere.
Yeah.
Not there.
Yeah, you're bait out there. So
yeah. Beautiful place. Great culture. Awesome. Great food experience.
Well, that sounds like fun. Yeah, that'd be awesome. So where can people keep up with you or follow you, Chris?
LinkedIn is the number one. I don't really do any of the other platforms anymore. So that's
your book's on Amazon, right?
It is, yeah. Relentless AF, Amazon, Canada, US, you name it, internationally. It's found its way all over the world.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today, Chris. It was a pleasure to have you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for the invite, man. Good to catch up.